Yeah, on-site photos. Let's talk just a minute here about on-site evaluations because this is one of those areas where if you're not careful, you can make a lot of mistakes. It's also never probably been easier than it is now to find people that are looking to do this type of work. And so, uh, one of the issues we've always had, and of course, if you're looking at tax sale investing, one of the things that you thought about is being an out-of-state investor in real estate. And it's possible to do now. It's something that's actually pretty easy to do now with all the different online resources that exist. But when we're preparing for a tax sale, it's tempting sometimes to use online information in order to determine the condition of a property. And the problem is that that information is just not correct. We always have to perform on-site evaluations. So as out-of-state investors, rather than going there ourselves, obviously, we can hire somebody to go out there and take photos of the property that can help us determine, what the condition currently looks like with the property, and if there's things that we need to be worried about. What kind of condition is it in? How much work is it going to need? Because we're going to use the information we get from the photos in order to kind of set our max bids if we're going to end up bidding on the property.
Yeah, in fact, it doesn't happen very often. I can only think of a couple of times in the last 15 years, but I can think of students that, came to us and bought a property, without getting an on-site evaluation. Well, did you get an on-site evaluation? No. Did your coach or did we tell you to? Yes. And we were able to help them with the situation as best as we can. Luckily, they didn't pay a lot for it, but you always have to have an on-site evaluation. Like Shade said, there's so many opportunities. There's so many different ways that you can find people that isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg to send out there. It's worth it to spend 50 or 100 or even $200 if they've got to drive past a lot of properties to get photos of those properties. That extra little upfront money is going to save you in the long run from making a serious mistake and losing big money.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain costs you just can't really avoid, and so you're going to have to spend money in order to determine what the current condition of the property is. It's one of those things you just can't avoid because the risk is too great. The risk is too great for making a mistake on that. The information that you need to obtain is too important. And so, hiring people though has never been easier. Like Steve was saying, there are a lot of ways that we can find people to do this. There are a lot of people on classified services that are looking for work like this that they can do. So that's one easy way that we found here to find people. There's actually services that go out and take photos of properties now, that are popping up and they're usable. And so that's something else that has started to become more common. Um, there's a number of places that you can hire. We like to place listings in classified services there in the area because you tend to get people that are already looking for work in classified areas. And so, and what's also nice is that in our listing, we can pretty well give them the information that they need in order to determine if they're interested in doing this kind of work. And usually they can determine that just fine, and we can provide the list, all of the addresses and instructions here for them that will simplify their job a little bit and help them understand what we need from them. But lots of different potential people it could be. If you already have been working in an area, that makes it that much easier because you may already have people in place, like like somebody handling the landscaping and the grass cutting, or somebody kind of like a handyman you could hire to do this. Anybody that's local to the area there could be a good resource for you, and essentially they kind of end up being the first team member that you start to bring on for that project.
Yeah, I mean, hiring from the classifieds is usually going to be the cheapest. In fact, on our weekly webinar, we teach about how to geo map those properties and create the route and send them a Google route where they'll take them from one property to the next so that we can determine how much we're willing to pay them because we know how many miles it's going to take and how long it's going to take. There is an advantage if we can find a good handyman because we can say, okay, we're looking at buying these properties, and if we are able to pick one up, you've got somebody already on the line that can go out and change the locks, that can start cleaning it up, that can start removing it, removing stuff off of the property and helping you decide what your strategy is going to be, include taking interior photos as they're going through that. And so if we are able to find a good handyman, we'll use them even if it costs us a little bit more, because also they're going to have a level of expertise. They're going to be able to look at things like the roof or the foundation or what they're able to see from the cover. I always say, in this case, we do have to judge the book by the cover, and many times, unless we're looking at auctions like in New York, where we can see interior photos, and that just gives us additional information. But that's really what we're trying to determine is we're trying to get as much information as we can before making an investment. And with structured property, we just can't judge the online evaluation. Just like we were looking there, we saw some of those street views could be 5 years old, and a lot can change within 5 years or even 5 months.
Yeah, in fact, we need to make sure that we're getting new pictures here of the property. Now, hiring somebody also can be somewhat confusing for them a bit. And we've made the mistake before of not providing adequate instructions to the people taking the photos. And when that happens, the results are generally not good. And when I say, the results are not good, it meaning that a lot of times you don't really get photos back that are all that usable for helping you determine the property condition. And so they end up being a total waste. And so one of the things that you can do is educate the person that you're going to have take the photos a bit. Anything you can do to help them understand what you're going to be using the photos for, and kind of the role that they'll be playing here in this process will help, because uh, they need to understand how important the images are, and the fact that you're using these images in order to set the value of the property. And so this is just a little like a guide, something that we send or attach to emails that we're going to send out to drivers or somebody that's going to go and take a look at properties for us, because it can provide some instructions here about exactly what it is that we're doing and what we need from them. And so, it essentially says, "Hi, I'm a real estate investor who's targeting homes, in this area. Um, you know, I am out of state, unable to visit properties in person to evaluate the condition. And, I'll be using the photographs you take to identify potential issues with the homes and to estimate the cost of repairs. So your photos are going to play a crucial role in selecting properties and determining how much I'll pay for them." And we've got some examples there of images, but we let them know here that we need at least 3 to 6 images of each property, and from different angles if we can, to let us know what's going on here with the property, and from different angles, and to help us see other things as well, things like the neighborhood, and what their neighbors are like. I mean, you know, the neighbors are important, and you can't really pick your neighbors. You can only pick the properties that you're going to buy. And so in some cases, if there's neighbor properties that are bad enough, it can scare us off from properties altogether. But those are some of the things we can determine from the images that somebody like this takes.
Yeah, 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 exactly. In fact, when we're talking with our members, we recommend even putting some of the requirements there within the listing. So if you're going to be doing a Craigslist listing, looking for a potential somebody you could hire to take photographs, well, we may say we're going to need photos of, we're going to need 3 to 6 photos of each property, including, the sides, the front, the roof, and so even when they're calling you, they've got an idea of what they're going to need to do. Like Shade said, we've had times, especially in the past years ago, and it's the reason why we educate the person taking photos, and even sometimes we'll offer them a bonus if they are able to take real good photos. Hey, if you do a great job and the photos turn out the way that I hope they will, I'll give you an extra $30 on top of it or Venmo it to you. We want to incentivize them to be able to take good photos, because we've had some where it was completely useless for us. So they went out there and it's almost like they just drove past as quick as they could and take a photo. If they have the ability, even taking a short video can be incredibly helpful for us as well. Almost everyone's going to have that available there on their phone. And so really they just need phone and transportation, and they can go take photos for you and email you that information. So it's just become so much easier now to be able to do this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that they can do to kind of go above and beyond. Like, for instance, videos are incredibly helpful. Um, but the other thing also may need to help them understand is uh, a like a property information system, for the photos. In other words, it's not just enough to take a photos of the properties that we need, but we need some way to identify what that photo is an image of. To kind of identify what I mean, because you take a lot of photos, it can get pretty confusing about what you have images of and what you don't. And so we also try to implement some type of a system that allows us to know what the next series of pictures are going to be for. And it's usually something tied to something like the a property number, auction number, or like the parcel number. Something like that, will help us understand a little bit better about what's going on here. And so we use property information boards or images all the time, or we might just write down numbers on a piece of paper that help us kind of identify what the next batch of pictures is going to be, an image of. But we need the individual taking the photos to be kind of familiar with what we're talking about here, because they're the ones that are going to kind of help us keep track of this and make sure it's organized.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. In fact, sometimes we'll even include a photo of the property. So we'll just open up a Word doc, we'll put the address down, and then we'll take a screenshot of the photo from Google Street Views and include that so that they know what the house looks like. Sometimes if the address isn't very clear, we've got back photos that are of the house next door, and so we found it pretty easy to be able to do is just to open up a Word doc, put the address there, take a screenshot, put the photo there on the Word doc, and have a list there that we can send them in a PDF. So as they're driving and looking at the address, they can look there at the photo and make sure it's the right home. That way you don't get photos of the house next door and you're doing an on-site evaluation on the house next door when it's actually, you're doing an evaluation on the wrong home.
Yeah, providing a photo of the property can be incredibly helpful for the driver, just because there are lots of places where finding addresses is not quite as simple as it is today for us. And oftentimes now we can just listen to the phone and it will tell us and point us to exactly where the property is at. But we don't always have those capabilities. In fact, sometimes we lose internet access in general trying to get out in some of these areas to get information about these properties. Anything that the driver can provide to us here is going to be very helpful. And at the same time, we also understand that this is not something they can spend too much time on. And so it's a matter of trying to make the most of your money, trying to make sure that you're sending them out there on good properties to review, and also enough properties so that if you have some redemptions occur, you suddenly don't have any inventory. You want to have enough properties you're looking at here so that you can account for some of those redemptions that do occur. Um, the other thing is just having them focus on any damage they see specifically. That can be very helpful too, because if they get there and they see, they notice certain problems with the property, they can take an extra image or two of those, and that will help us kind of identify that there is an issue there that we need to worry about, or we would need to account for. And honestly, some properties, it's almost impossible to get images of any of this stuff. There are some properties. My least favorite properties there to go and look at are the ones that have, there are some properties that have, they're sitting very far back here on driveways, that could be a half mile to a mile long. You just cannot get into an area where you can see anything about the property here, without basically driving up their driveway. And so yeah, we run into properties all the time though, and providing something like a photo of the property can save us a lot of headache there. It can save the driver a lot of time in helping them identify the right properties, and it can save us the headache of having a driver take an image of the wrong property, because we've had that happen before as well, where we're preparing for a sale under the assumption that the property we're looking at is actually something different than what it is.
Yeah. One thing we'll also um, talk to the photographer or the route runner for us about is looking for any homes that are vacant that might have open doors or windows. If the home is vacant and the front door is open, that is a major risk, on that particular property. Or if we see that a bunch of the windows are broken on an older home or on a property and it looks like it's been vacant. Now, if the window's down and there's a car in the driveway, that's not something that we're going to be worried about. But if it is vacant, be sure to, look for any of that information. And if the home is vacant, we should be able to spend a little bit more time there as well, or they should be able to take a couple of more photos because we're not essentially encroaching on anyone that's living in the home right then.
Yeah, that's actually something else that's kind of nice to tell them, ahead of time, is whether from the images you see and what you have, the information you have, whether you believe the property to be vacant or occupied. And again, doesn't have to be right every time, but just a kind of a guess can help. But yeah, the quickest way that you can lose a lot of money in a tax sale is to buy a home sight unseen, or based on old information, that's online that's no longer relevant or no longer applicable to the property. It's a very easy way to make a huge mistake. So the easiest way around that is just to make sure you don't buy anything, without at least having some pictures taken of it ahead of time, just to make sure that you don't make one of those types of mistakes because things can change overnight with the property. Properties can burn down, trees can fall over. So many different things can happen that would affect the value that we just can't risk it. That the property is still in the exact same shape it was in the time from the photos that we saw.